Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this week's look at how the Brexit media is spinning things, I'm actually going to have a little palate cleanse. I'm going to take a look at an article in the Daily Telegraph, which is a Brexit supporting paper. It's a little less extreme than some of its cousins, and the article I'm going to go with this week is actually attempting to, in its own way, reintroduce some sense of proportion to the debate by arguing that we're not only close to a negotiated settlement on the Northern Ireland Protocol, but that it's necessary to get there. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, it's getting hot in here actually. It's a bit too summer. We've had several days of summer here. I'm done now. I'm ready for autumn. But when it comes to reporting on Brexit, essentially there are three kinds of Tory media. The first are the likes of the Mail, the Express and the Sun, and the Spectator, I suppose, although I'm not sure what you'd call that mainstream media. But they push the hard Brexit at all times. They will not be happy until Britain is surrounded by an impenetrable bubble which keeps the outside world completely out. Like when Ian Blackford was promoting the idea of Scottish independence again on Wednesday, he said, "Could you please stop the world? Scotland would like to get on," which is exposing the fact that Brexit Britain is not global Britain at all. We are the furthest thing from it, in fact. You know, we are the North Korea Britain. This is why people said years ago that Brexit would divide the UK. It was as clear as crystal that the Brexit path that the Tories would adopt was not at all compatible with international relations. The second type of Tory media are those who are not in favour of Brexit at all, but they are muted in their reporting of it. And this is because they are pro-Tory for whatever reason. You know, they know that the fortunes of the Conservatives are now tied to that of Brexit. So they encourage a softening of Brexit, but they fear to speak out too strongly against it. So it's about like trying to move it in a particular direction without attacking it for fear of turning people off the Conservatives in general, because it's the Conservatives who brought the Brexit. You know, these media are best exemplified amongst the mainstream media by, say, the Times. But then you've got your third type, and that's those who pushed for Brexit, but are not in favour of the hard Brexit as such, whether because they're not sold on the ideology or just because they know it's too harsh for the concept to survive political realities. The Daily Telegraph is certainly in this category. In 2020, they were the main Tory media outlet reporting on the possibility of extending the transition period to deal with the pandemic and then give our eventual withdrawal from the Single Market and Customs Union full attention. In reality, many of its readers may well have preferred it if we'd never actually left the single market. It's not clear how many though, because I do notice yesterday they ran a different Brexit article arguing that Labour would seek to have us rejoin the single market. Now, unless they are secretly wanting Labour to win the next election, which is possible, I suppose, it's probably unlikely, this is probably not the sort of article to publish if you think most of your readers are in favour of the single market access and you still want a Conservative government in place after the next election. So it's against that background that I read another article with interest. Now, let's be clear. It was a pro-Brexit paper feeding on pro-Brexit ignorance. It's still the usual Brexit cesspit. It talked, for example, of Brit bashing French and Germans without qualifying it, without saying how they were doing this. It talked about how they were making unreasonable demands of Maros Shevchovich, the Deputy Commission President who's involved in the protocol talks on the EU side. Oh, he's in a bind because France and Germany are being unreasonable. You know, it was a piece designed to appeal to Eurosceptics because, well, that's who they are. But it was still a welcome dialing down of the rhetoric from a pro-hard Brexit outlet. You know, the headline for this was, "Ignore the fire and fury. The UK and EU are closer than it seems on the Northern Ireland Protocol." Now, this is true in a big way, but it is also wrong in an important respect as well. It's correct in that British officials have actually been working very hard to work on solutions to the issues with the protocol for some time. I was talking about this over a year ago. It doesn't get any attention in the mainstream media, but that's deliberate to make people think we're at some sort of impasse and that this is going on forever and we're getting nowhere and that therefore drastic measures are needed. You know, so you may be forgiven for thinking that it's the EU trying to come up with solutions and it's the UK being really difficult. In actual fact, UK officials in Northern Ireland are actually working their socks off. And a lot of progress has been made. It just doesn't suit the public narrative, so they don't want the media talking about it. You know, there has been a lot of movement to smooth over the rough edges. The work would go more quickly and effectively if the UK government did not keep abusing the trust of our trade partners, because a lot of Dealing with the practical implications of any trade deal of any kind relies on a certain amount of trust. There'll be less friction if there's trust there. Put it that way. There's less friction if there's trust. If there isn't trust, there's more friction. It's really that simple. It's also true that there isn't really a lot that needs sorting out. I mean, yeah, final details can take a long time to tie down, but there are very few outstanding issues. If we refuse to accept regulatory alignment, which we are doing, there's only so much you can do anyway. Where they are wrong, though, is that this latest move by the government is because of pressure from those who want the protocol disbanding for ideological reasons. Last year, David Frost, whilst he was Brexit minister, said that his strategy was to behave very badly in order to draw concessions from the EU. So his tactic of threatening to say, trash the Northern Ireland Protocol, he said, he was quite public about it, was to draw concessions from the EU. Now, it didn't work and it won't work. However, the government could, in theory, do the same here. Let's imagine this fantasy outcome. So they pass this legislation to act tough, like we're going to show them. Remember that the legislation doesn't actually dissolve the protocol itself. As I understand it, what it does is it gives ministers the power to remove it if they like, or even any bits of it that they like. So the government could pass this legislation. In theory, nothing happens. They then could announce some agreement with the EU that was agreed back in 2021 but wasn't reported here, and claim that this was a hard-won concession that only came about because the EU were afraid of the use of this legislation. And if only they'd agreed it in 2021, which they already did, then this nightmare could have been avoided, and this is why we shouldn't trust the EU. They could absolutely have it feed into their narrative. Johnson gets to calm the whole situation down. The protocol's in place. He looks like a strong leader to those who get all their facts from unreliable sources like, Boris Johnson. But this isn't what's happening. If this is all Boris Johnson wanted to do, he could have done it last year when he still had the authority in Parliament to get his way. He's now lost that. Involving Parliament in any of his schemes is hazardous because his MPs cannot always be trusted to support him. Johnson is carrying out this move because he must, politically. And the reason he must is that the ERG are exploiting a weakness. They only agreed to support the Northern Ireland Protocol on the condition that it would be dropped later on. Johnson gave them his word that he would do this. Steve Baker, a former chair of the ERG and still arguably their most influential member, publicly said so. Now, I do not know how long they were willing to give Johnson to comply with this promise, but it seems clear they think he's had long enough. They also know it's easier to twist his arm when he is weak, and he is weak now. He needs all of the support he can get. And one point of interest in this article, so it mentions the ERG as being the pressuring force on the UK side. When it's trying to present its balanced view, it's saying France and Germany being difficult on the EU side, the ERG being difficult on the UK side. But it doesn't mention the DUP once. Now, you may think that the DUP are instrumental in the politics of this bill because they say they will refuse to take their seats in Stormont until they see action. They say that publishing the bill is not enough to satisfy them. This implies they want to see it not only passed but enacted as well. They'll be waiting a while if that's what they're after. If this bill ever does get passed by Parliament, and that is doubtful, it will not be this year. So why doesn't the article mention them? Because they're irrelevant. Yes, they're causing a lot of problems in Northern Ireland, but the English Tories don't care about that. More, they know that Boris Johnson doesn't care about that. The only group of people responsible for this mess are the ERG. If they were all abducted by aliens and removed from the solar system, but the DUP were still there with their shenanigans, this bill would be dropped the next day and we'd never hear about it again. But the article, despite trying to paint the situation as much the EU's fault as the UK's, nonetheless sets out how close we would be to a reasonable deal if the government were after a reasonable deal. In fact, it characterised the only sticking point as being related to the trusted trader scheme that came down to what they said was disagreement over 26 tick boxes. Now, this may or may not be the only practical issue, but it's certainly the only legal issue to agree in a final settlement. The bottom line is that we are not promising to maintain EU standards. Now, it doesn't matter that our standards are fine now. They're not going to be in future. We have already signed trade deals that mean this cannot be the case. So the EU has to be wary of smuggling. Also, the fact that we're not carrying out checks on things coming into Britain means that they have to be wary of smuggling again. So if there weren't any checks between Britain and Northern Ireland, well, if there's none coming into Britain, then that means there's none going into Northern Ireland as well. That effectively means you've got a massive hole for smugglers in the EU single market. You know, the EU have already reported finding drugs and weapons being smuggled into Northern Ireland. They don't want those passing unchecked into the single market. You know, that means we are going to need checks in the IRC. All there is to it, no other way. Not until we get a non-Tory government anyway. But the closing line in the article was one of eventual agreement. I mean, this was the real palate cleanser. I've been so used to reading Brexit stories in other and Daily Telegraph as well when they do them. And, you know, like what you'll often get is they may quote a government spokesperson attacking the EU as the final word. That would be the case in the Express. Or it might be a closing line arguing for war with France, which would probably be in the Mail. Or maybe they'd be quoting someone called Chantal with a big chest and a small brain talking about how we shouldn't be listening to foreigners, innit? As would be the case with the Sun. So although the article was still a xenophobic Brexit cesspit, they did at least provide some air freshener and a map to the way out. The closing line was, we're going to get a deal. Just don't chill. We're going to get a deal. Not that we should trash the protocol, not that it should all be gone, not that it's outrageous that these checks exist. We're going to get a deal. Chill. Relatively refreshing, really. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join membership as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.